how could I best help you today?
So, so it's going to be two parts basically. Like for the LSAT, for me, for quite a while, like I took the LSAT back in 2017, but I barely studied for it. And that was because, it was really hard for me to commit to the LSAT because I had other obligations. But for me now, it's balancing study with full-time job. And that's where I find the difficulty to balance both of those. But working from home, it's easier studying, considering not traveling, especially in New York City. The subways take forever. But working from home, it's easier to study in the morning and maybe sometime at night. But it's hard to focus because I haven't studied in so long. So building that study stamina up, it's taking some time because I was shooting for August with a 4 to 6 month schedule, but it's looking like it might be October or November.
Right.
So that's really hard.
Yeah. So when you're having difficulty focusing on studying, what else is coming up instead?
So I have a big family at home, so it's hard to study at home considering I have a newborn child at home because my sister just had a baby. So it's hard when you have so many people at home. So I try to get in study time before everyone gets up. But it gets harder as the day progresses, sometime in the afternoon. Even when you try to focus, there's someone that comes in and you just lose focus. But I try to get in at least 2 to 3 hours a day. I shoot for 5, but it ends up being 3 hours.
Yeah, and I can definitely relate to the difficulty. I don't know if you heard for a moment, my child was crying in the background. I have a 1.5-year-old myself. And so I'm like putting myself on mute whenever the crying gets a little bit too loud. So I can certainly understand where you're coming from. Additionally, congratulations on the new addition to your family. I could imagine that, although it's difficult, it's also wonderful, but it's also difficult, but it's also wonderful. So everything is a mix. You mentioned that the afternoon becomes a bit more difficult. Maybe there's more activity, hustle and bustle going on in the house at that time. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep. 100%.
Okay. So that being said, which other times does that leave for you where you think you could really maximize your prep?
So usually I try to get in, let's say I usually hop on, start working at 9 o'clock. So I try to get in from 7 to 9, 2 hours there. And then I usually try to get in sometime at night, after work around 5 to 7, where things are a little calmer, the baby is sleeping. And then if I don't get it from 5 to 7, I try to study at night, but it gets difficult at night to just focus on studying.
Yeah. So why is the evening more difficult than the morning?
Because you're basically like gassed out. You're mentally, it's hard when it comes to study. Like with logic games, it's hard to study at night.
Sure. I can certainly understand that. For many people, the evening, you're tired. There's more people around. The evening is more often for socializing than is 7 in the morning. So that can have a different flavor to it.
Right. So do you recommend just studying in the morning and trying to do it some at night?
Yeah, you grab the hours. You grab the hours where you can, but I'm also acknowledging that the evening hours may be more difficult, or you may not get as much out of it because, as you said, you're gassed out, you're tired,
right.
And then there are more people around who you could potentially socialize with, even if it's simply your family who's around.
Right.
Maybe they're all looking to hang out. But 7 in the morning, you didn't wake up at the crack of dawn just to hang out or watch Netflix or go on social media or whatever else, right? You woke up for a reason. You're not going to mess around.
Right.
So I have the same experience as well, by the way. So the question is, what can you do to create more productive study time? What can you do to get more time in the morning or to get more out of what you do in the morning?
So most likely it'd probably have to be like, instead of waking up, let's say waking up at 6, I would probably sleep earlier and try to wake up maybe an hour and a half earlier, just to get, instead of getting 2 hours in, try to get maybe 3.5 hours in of productive studying. Because at that time, no one's awake. You're not socializing with anyone. No one's going to come into your room. So you can just probably get about 3 hours of studying in. But that was my schedule. That was going to be my next question to you, considering with, I'm right now, I'm doing the 4-month study schedule, right? So on a daily basis, you're doing about, I think, 4 questions, right? Four game. Let's say I'm at logic games right now, right? And I'm doing about 4 logic games a day, right? So you do the games. I do one game, then I review it. I do one game, then I review it. So with that, how long should that, like, on average take though? Because it takes me about, let's say about 3.5 hours to do like 4 games, but review the wrong answers and try to see why the right answer is right. So how long does it take typically?
I'm not going to give a default answer on this because I don't think there necessarily is one.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to ask you instead, do you feel like those 3.5 hours, you're getting a lot out of it?
I am, because I understand why I'm getting the wrong answers wrong. Sometimes it's not even the wrong answer. Sometimes I just won't see, like, I won't see a deduction, or I won't see an inference, right? So then I'll go and watch the videos on YouTube, your videos on YouTube for, like, for example, prep test 69, and then, then I'll be like, oh, okay, that makes sense. The inference makes sense. So that's really helped me. But then I try to do it again on my own just to make sure that, okay, this is why the right answer is right, and this is why I got it wrong. So it's helped me a lot. I did have a basic understanding of logic games because I did take a prep course before, but that was about 2 years ago. So I guess I have a little foundation on it, but now I'm just building on it because I'm going in depth with it, because I've never reviewed my wrong answers before, right? So there's really no point of studying if you're not reviewing your wrong answers. But that's what I'm doing now. So it's helping a lot. It's helping a lot.
Excellent. Well, if it's working for you, I'm not going to suggest changing it. If you could get similar insights in half the time, I'd say, sure, do it. But I do believe that there is value in going in more depth. And I'd rather that you do fewer games and review them in more depth. And even if that means you have more time now, you mentioned going from August to October. So that gives you an additional month plus to do a bit more work, to do a bit more games, to review in more depth. So I don't see a reason to cut that short.
Okay. And then when it comes to reviewing questions, right? So it's good. Should you be reviewing only the wrong answers, or should you be reviewing in a sense like, okay, why did I get this right answer right? Like what's a good approach to review it, whereas you're not wasting too much time and you don't want to cause burnout either?
Yeah, sure. So reviewing every single thing you do, period, would be a lot.
Right.
You don't need to do it all, though. Think about where can you get value? Where can you gain understanding? So what you get wrong is obviously a prime candidate. Most people do think of that. The next, though, is what did you guess on and still got right? Because that could have easily gone the other way. So maybe it was a 50-50 guess when you were down to 2. Maybe it was some hesitancy, lacking confidence. Maybe your confidence level was a 6 out of 10. Not that high. I don't expect you to have 10 out of 10 confidence in everything when you're just studying, but 6 out of 10 or below, I'd say it's probably worth looking at more closely as well, even if you're guessing and got it right. And then there's also the ones where you ran out of time and you guessed and got it right, perhaps, or you ran out of time. Regardless, that there's something that you maybe could have solved more efficiently at some point in the section. So even if you get it right, but you could have gotten it right faster, there's something there too. And you'll notice this especially with games, because there's maybe more inferences you could make up front. Maybe there's more previous work you could have done. You'll see in my videos a lot, the logic games explanations on YouTube that you mentioned. I'm using tons of previous work. I'm jumping around with regard to the order in which I approach the questions. And I'm also making a lot of inferences up front, as you noted. And so if there's a game you could do better in one of those ways, there is something to be learned there too.
And when it comes to the logic game rules and diagrams, I noticed that whenever majority of the YouTube videos that you have, you're making a lot of inferences. You're showing all the work and stuff like that. And typically, I think for 4 logic games in a section, you have about 8 and something minutes, right, to do one logic game. Is that something that you want students to do just in the beginning, or do you want them to do that on the test as well, just so it makes it easier?
To do what on the exam? To make it
to do all the to do all the work, like because I notice I do all the inferences and stuff, like, but it typically takes a lot of time, considering that the test is not paper now, it's more digital. And even the LSAT Flex, right, you would have to use paper and look back at the screen. You would, so how do you typically, what's a good strategy to use when you're doing all the work, or even when you're Xing out like A or B or C or D, because that typically takes a long time when you're doing an LSAT Flex, instead of doing a paper test, right? So you're trying to save as much money, save as much time as possible.
Yeah, sure. So a couple of things there. One is that games, it's too complicated to do in your head. Do use the scratch paper. You've got it. You've got, for Flex, you've got 5 sheets, which is about 10 pages, because double-sided. So you have plenty of space to write things down. As for looking back and forth between the screen and your paper, it's something to get used to. You would have to do it on the digital LSAT on tablet as well. You'd be looking back and forth there too. But the looking back and forth doesn't automatically mean you should just throw aside scratch paper and disregard it altogether. It's virtually, hardly anybody can do games in their head, myself included. You got to write it down. You got to make your diagrams, and you've also make your main diagram as well as all your local diagrams, the hypotheticals. It's worth doing. Try to do games without writing anything down, and you may not get very far.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
You have time to practice here. You've got plenty of time between now and October. As we speak now, you have about 2 months and change, 2.5 maybe. So you've got a lot of time. Secondly, you mentioned the 8:45, and I just want to call that out for a minute. The average of 8 minutes and 45 seconds per game. That is simply an average, but I wouldn't think about it so precisely. You've got 4 games, 35 minutes. They vary in difficulty. So some will take less time, hopefully. Some will take more time. It's natural. You want to focus on approaching the easier games hyper efficiently. Some games could be 6 minutes if you're really good at that game type and you're good at making that flow of inferences. Gotcha. Other games may take longer, and that's to be expected. As for my process of making inferences up front, maybe making multiple main diagrams, I would recommend doing that on test day. You may not do it for all 4 games, but even if you just do it for a couple, you're solving them more efficiently, and then you free up the time to solve the others, even if they take a little bit longer.
Got it. All right. Thanks, Steve. And I have a question about law school admissions strategy, right? So what is a good time to typically apply to law school, considering I am a splitter, right? I'm a non-traditional student and a splitter. A splitter in the sense, like I have to be a splitter because I have a low GPA and I want a high LSAT score, right? That's the only thing that can really compensate for the low GPA. So what's a good time to apply? I know usually people say sometime in October or November, the earlier the better, but let's say that you don't have the LSAT score that you want and you end up taking the January exam or the February, March exam. Is that too late?
It's not ideal. I would say ideally you want to, in this year, we're speaking 2020, take October or November and apply at that time once you get your score back. So you work on your applications. We're speaking now at the end of July. So I'd say work on your applications on this side as you're taking take a break from your LSAT prep. Then you get everything ready to go. The second you get your October score back, if it's what you want, you apply with that. If you want to retake in November, that's fine. Wait to submit until you get your November score back. But if you're going for January, February, March, you could still do it. There are people who get into great schools applying then, but it is a bit later in the cycle, meaning there's less scholarship money available and it is a little bit harder. But if you could get 3 points higher by applying in January rather than November, probably worth it.
So worth it only if you get if you think you'll get a higher LSAT score. 3 points,
exactly. I mean, unfortunately, we always have imperfect information because you don't know what you're going to get. But if your score isn't what you want it to be for October or November, I'd say retake a couple months later, and then you could decide to apply then relatively later in the cycle, or you could wait another year, which nobody ever wants to do. But if you're not in a hurry, especially as a non-traditional student, you may recognize the idea that another year in the grand scheme of things maybe isn't that big a deal.
Right. No, 100% I agree with that. And when it comes to optional essays, right? When it comes to like a diversity statement and an addenda. Addenda would be for the GPA, and then the diversity statement can be typically what makes you diverse in general. Either it be just in general, right? It can be anything. It doesn't necessarily have to be like religion, color, or anything like that.
There's a wide variety of things it could be. We actually have a diversity statement workshop coming up tonight in the course. It'll be at 8 p.m. Eastern. And so I would definitely recommend attending that since you're in the course. You have access to that. And so I'll be going in depth on diversity statements. But as you said correctly, it's not just race, ethnicity, religion. There are a variety of other things you could write about as well.
Okay, got it. All right, and then clarification about character and fitness, because this is something that I want to clarify. So considering I drove in New York City, I drove Uber, right? And you do get tickets in New York City. Is that something that goes on character? Is that something that goes into, like, you have to write a character fitness statement when you apply?
Depends on the exact wording of the question. The character fitness questions vary by state, in part because different state bar exams have different questions they ask. And so it kind of trickles down from the bar when you're applying for admission to the bar down to the law school. So look at the specific wording within your application. I would imagine that some schools will require you to disclose that. Others won't. If you need to disclose it, simply be matter of fact about it. Obviously mention that you were an Uber driver, so you may have more tickets than the average person because you were driving more than the average person. Not that you're necessarily a more risky driver or something like that. Then also, secondly, just one side note to that, don't fall on your knees begging for forgiveness over traffic tickets. It's not the end of the world, and recognize that it's, as far as situations go, it's relatively minor. They're not going to necessarily care that much about parking things or anything minor of that nature. I think it's just be matter of fact about it. And so you recognize the importance of following rules, but they're going to understand.
Got it. All right. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, of course, Dave. Glad to help. But before we sign off, what would you say is the biggest insight you got from our call today?
Basically clarification of all the questions. I mean, you do such a good job with it, especially with when I asked you questions about the logic games. You were very precise and clear with it, and I think just in general, like, you've supported me, but not only me, but probably all your students when it comes to asking you questions and you answering them. You typically answer those questions within like 10 hours, 5 hours, like right away. So you've been really, like, for me, you've motivated me a lot to with the LSAT, because I lost that motivation, but I think that's the biggest insight. You're always there for your students, not just for this call, but in general. Whenever we email you, whenever we need you, you're always there for your students. So I think that's the biggest insight I got from this course, from this call, just talking to you via email. So thank you. I appreciate all the help that you've given me.
Thanks, Dave. I'm glad to help, and I appreciate you for showing up so powerfully in this call and in the course as well. So please keep at it, and I'll see you in class soon.
Definitely. Take care, Steve.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.